Welcome to my series about Pluto through all the 12 houses. This one is part 1, where I will be covering house placement 1 to 4. You can take a look at your own personal birth chart, and I recommend that you do so through the whole sign system. And just in general, if you are curious, you can listen for all the 12 placements and learn a lot, hopefully. Before I dive into Pluto through all the 12 houses, I first want to say that if you haven't watched my previous video about Pluto in astrology, I really highly recommend you to begin there. It's linked in the description box below. And in that video, I explored Pluto through astronomy, mythology, and symbolism, because I truly believe that when you understand a planet's origin, it also helps you to understand what kind of meaning it carries in astrology and therefore also in your natal birth chart. I want to take this opportunity to introducing Pluto from a personal perspective, because when I was 15 years old, I almost died from a severe infection. And during that experience, I had what I can best describe as a profound out-of-body experience, and it completely changed the way that I view life and understood life from a very early age. And connected to Pluto, the planet of death, rebirth, transformation, it made me understand something very profoundly about the human experience, which is that the only thing that we can be certain of is that everything changes all the time. It is the natural order of cosmos. And what I came to see a lot in my astrology practice is that whenever Pluto come up, it's one of those planets alongside Saturn that people don't really understand the profoundness of, because it's highly feared, it's highly misunderstood as well. And from an evolutionary perspective too, on top of it, it is also one of the less convenient life lessons that Pluto holds. But that at the same time, as I talked about in my video about Pluto in general, Pluto is named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. And despite the underworld being the world of death and deceased souls passing over, it is also the underworld that holds the big treasures of earth, such as jewelry, precious metals, and so forth. So Pluto really holds the key to the deepest treasures that we can get out of this life on a soul level. And that's why I'm so passionate, amongst other things, for conveying Pluto through the houses. I also want to say that it's really important for you to understand that Pluto is one of the outer planets, and it takes about 248 years to travel around the zodiac signs, meaning that, anywhere between 12 and 30 years, it stay in the same zodiac sign. So it's more like of an generational planet. However, for that exact reason, when I look to Pluto in a personal birth chart, I pay very close attention to the houses that it occupies and to the aspects. The house shows the area of life where this deeper process of transformation of Pluto unfolds, while I would say the aspects kind of tells us how Pluto communicates with the rest of your psyche. And as always, astrology is symbolic, and it's also a lived experience. So you can understand placements in your chart more and more the deeper you go, but you also need to go out and engage with life in the next stages in order to integrate, and then you can go back and reflect over your chart again. Because there's no single placement in a chart that tells your entire story. So your birth chart is more of a conversation between many different planets, houses, and aspects. So I will encourage you to take what resonates about the house placement, stay curious, but also remember that these are just invitations for reflection. It's not absolute predictions. There will be something that might resonate a lot, other things that might resonate less. So with that in mind, let's explore Pluto through the houses. The first house in astrology is connected to Aries, the first sign of the zodiacs. It is the beginning of a new life cycle. It is about our physical presence, how we instinctively meet life. It's also about the first impression that we might leave on other people, like how we show up in our identity, how they look at us, how we experience ourselves. It's the house of I am. So it's not just how the world sees us, but also how we move through the world. The thing is that if you have Pluto placed here, or if Pluto is placed in the first house, everything about your identity and self-image, your personality, is the arena for deep, profound transformation. So you're likely not someone who lives a very fixed version of yourself. You can maybe even be someone known as a bit of a chameleon throughout your life, because you seek to, or are being pushed to, experience life through many different roles, many different personalities or identities. It could be that you are even being forced to change very rapidly, very often. It can, because it's through Pluto, it can be through painful experiences and grief, where perhaps you're someone who had to grow up very early, went from the personality of a child to an adult very fast. It could also just be that there were parts or versions of yourself that, just stopped fitting, and you had to do something in order to feel better, because Pluto in the first house just very rarely would allow you to stay attached to anything in regards to your physical presence or your personality in general. And it's also quite interesting when we think of the first house in the sense of appearance and the body, because you could be someone, if you have displacement also, but of course depending on how it is aspecting, but you could experience significant changes in how you physically look. Many people with displacement could have been, maybe severely overweight at a young age and then losing tons of weight, or the other way around. There could be something with the way that you look in general that is just very, very changeable. You could have the need to change your hair colors, your hairstyle, however you dress in many different ways in order to experience yourself in many different versions. And sometimes people with displacement can be perceived as very intense or magnetic or mysterious, because Pluto in modern astrology is a co-ruler of Scorpio, so many of the mysterious traits in regards to Scorpio is also connected to Pluto. So it could even be that you don't even see yourself as being mysterious, but many people might explain to you that, oh, you seem so mysterious or intense. Even before you maybe get to say anything, you can have situations where people draw conclusions about you just by your presence alone, because you can tend to bring out intense emotional responses in other people's personality, or perhaps the sides of themselves that they are not willing to challenge, especially in regards to first house matters. What I tend to see as well is that because Pluto is indeed one of the planets that when it's involved, it can bring to surface a lot of the subconscious layers in other people as well. So the person carrying specific placements of Pluto can tend to bring those to the surface in the people that they meet. So it could be that you could have met people who were more fixed or more rigid in their ways, in their looks and how they carry themselves, and maybe secretly were envious of your self-expression, or maybe showed off even disgust, or like, who is this person, who do they think they are, like why are they carrying themselves this way. I also get a little bit of the signal that can happen a lot is if you imagine the the musician on stage, let's say it's a punk band or something else where the front singer, which will metaphorically be you now, is very expressive, have tons of, whatever, could be colored hair or tattoos or just a very distinct way of dressing themselves that makes them stand out, then there will be people who really love them for that and people who just can't stand it because perhaps that's the side that is being triggered within themselves. The shadow side, I would say, with this placement is that you might have learned from an early age that the world was not always safe. So you got this instinct of protecting yourself and reveal maybe very little about the true person beneath the surface. So it could have been very much about the looks and how you present yourself, but people would get nothing out of that is like true to your nature, because it was almost like that is the shell that protects you. Also think about the saying that sometimes the person that looks like the toughest has the softest heart. That can also be a very distinct feature of this placement. The thing is also that Pluto is just not really interested in staying the same throughout life, and being in the first house, again, it asks you to release identities. You're most likely not someone who, like people who stay in friendship groups for like 20 years and perhaps still hold on to the role that they had in that group. Like, let's say they met in elementary school and every time they come together they speak in the same way, talk about the same person, maybe even ask questions about, oh, do you know this person or do you know that person, and it's always on a repeated loop about the same group. You would most likely have absolutely no interest in that. You would find it almost like a choking experience because you're like, hey guys, have you not evolved from this? And that is also an interesting trait that I see with people who have Pluto in the first house. Another thing is that you can have several times in your life where you come to a painful realization about feeling stuck or traumatized or sad or somewhat exposed by other people. You could have been bullied for how you look, how you are, your identity, and then you might be someone who have built like a survival identity, but that is not authentic. And then after a while Pluto is saying, hey, you build this identity on survival and it's not really getting us anywhere. And that's where you can experience a lot of dark nights of the soul. You can experience a lot of times where you might even feel that you don't like your looks, you don't like your body, you don't look like the dress, how you're dressing. And if you look deeper beneath that, whenever you feel the need to change something in the outer experience, what your soul is communicating to you is that this is actually more about an identity shift that is calling on you. So remember that if you feel a painful need to change something, but you start changing it, like let's say you just put on another nail polish, whatever it might be, there is a deeper invitation for you to look beneath if there are any chapters in life that you should close. I would also say that over time with displacement, you could be someone that isn't afraid of changing anymore. The song that comes to me very strongly and the connection of this is the Change of David Bowie, because David Bowie was indeed someone that refused to be carved into a box and stay the same. And there's just something about Pluto in the first house that has the same need of freedom, of expression, of dressing, of not having like a stagnant identity or look, but being more fluent. And I would say a thing where you could really find the treasures beneath all of this would be who have I always been beneath all of this surface change? And it might be some question that you need to sit with for a longer time, or maybe even over years, just having it in the background. Because what is the essence that never changes in you? What is the essence that has always been there as long as you can remember? That is the core that you need to find and hold on to when transformation that can feel painful takes place in your life. And maybe a final thing that I will add to this is that it's not uncommon for someone with Pluto in the first house to also have some strongly resonating elements with Pluto in the seventh house. And this is because I like to interpret through the house axis as well, where the first and the seventh house are connected. And so it could be that if you don't see yourself too much in the description of your self in regards to, the world in total, it could be that you are someone that transforms immensely through your personal relationships, your romantic relationships, and your one-to-one friendships, like closer friendships. It could be that you were in one sort of relationship always drawn to when you were young, and then you are the complete opposite kind of person when you become older. There could definitely be a theme that I see as well, that you could be just a bit of a, not shapeshifter is not the correct word, but you could be someone whose identity are perhaps changing a lot in regards to seventh house matters. So if you are with a specific partner, it could be that you are mirroring that partner a lot, perhaps even changing your physical appearance a lot while you are in that relationship. And then looking to other relationships, it could be that you see that you have changed your appearance accordingly to those relationships as well, whether it's romantic, which is the most common, or if it's close friendships. And as I said in the intro, remember how the aspects to Pluto are extremely important as well. But I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Pluto in the first house, and remember to like and subscribe, and I hope to meet you in another video. Bye for now. So Pluto in the second house. Well, the second house is the house of our resources. And traditionally, it's associated with money, possessions, and income. But I think it's also important to understand that the second house goes so much deeper than that. The second house describes our relationship with security, our personal values, our talents. Maybe even more importantly, when it comes to Pluto, it also describes our sense of self-worth. So with someone who has Pluto based on their second house, there could be questions on, what do I rely on to feel safe? There could be very, very deep questions about your self-worth. Because when Pluto is in the second house, your relationship with security will be most likely a very profound, transformational journey for you. Especially if you are someone that from an early age you felt not confident, or you had experiences that maybe felt like they were breaking you down, like you just lost yourself or you had no self-worth at all. It's not unusual that I see in these birth charts with Pluto in the second house that it could be for individuals who experienced a lot of bullying in school, or who were not nurtured in their home environment in regards to their self-expression or sense of self, or there was some sort of like deeper, hurtful experience that made them question themselves and their worth. So if you have displacement, there might be some questions in regards to particularly that. Another way that it could express or come out is in actual connections to, money and resources. It could be that you grew up in a household where there was a lack or an abundance that somehow shaped you profoundly, shaped your sense of value, what you focus on, perhaps to an extent that it shaped you so much that you lost yourself in it. So Pluto is always tearing down the foundations that are not solid. So think of it as this, that maybe one of the themes with displacement could be that you need to redefine what security actually means. Let's say you inherited a lot of ideas of value and money and how to earn money or how to be self-sufficient, but you realize that no matter how much money that you earn, how much possessions that you have, beneath it there's a sense of unfulfillment, of shaky ground, of something just not being as solid as you thought it would be. For many people, there's a general theme that involves finances, whether the lack of them or having a lot of it. But in both cases, it tends to be an extreme one or the other. Also in regard to work, the work that you do for material possessions can be very extreme or very on the other side, not at all, because perhaps you even gave up before you tried. That could also be a sense of the deeper layers with the displacement. So you're definitely someone that on some level or another might need to really dive in to discover what true value is for you, not just the physical, but value in general. Value like the air that you breathe, the love that you give, the person that you are, all the things that cannot be bought for money. There is a remarkable pattern that I see when Pluto is placed in the second house, which is there's often cycles of life where, everything that you thought were your value or identity or what you hold on to very tightly is being stripped away from you, like almost overnight. So if you have been overly attached to your income, and that has made the foundation for your sense of worth, that could be a theme, like people who lose their money overnight or bankruptcy, or it could be that your career is how you see yourself and your worth, and then suddenly you're being laid off with no further explanations. Or it could even be your appearance, that you have spent a life getting your validation and your value out from other people's approval of your physical body, your appearance, what you look like, so that you have paid maybe even obsessive attention to those things like, smelling good, looking good, work, exercise, do everything you possibly can to be likable in that sense, and that somehow would lead you to a period in life where you might have burnt yourself out. It's also not unusual with displacement, people who develops some sense of eating disorders, whether it's overeating, emotional eating, or something of the more extreme sense of, an actual eating order like anorexia or bulimia. That can happen as well, because if you have been so connected to what you look like and you start to lose that or feel you can't gain the approval from your looks or the love from your looks, you can tend to go into extremes in order to sort of achieve that. And Pluto will then, reveal how fragile those foundations really are. It's important that you remember, if you have displacement, it's not about punishment, it's not about a negative faith or anything like that. It is really for you to become self-reliant in your sense of validation and value, and knowing that you can provide and reassure yourself, and that those elements doesn't come from possessions or outside validation. That is definitely a life theme for many with displacements. There could also be a tendency, that's another way that this can express itself, that maybe you hold on too tightly to money and possessions, and it creates a sense of either, even if you have enough, there's a sense of scarcity, or you hold so strongly on to what you own, that this in itself is your entire stability. Now, you don't have the stability within your emotional world, a psychological world, so now you need and crave to have that as a physical, measurable element. I see that as well sometimes too. And one theme that could be important for you could be, what is your connection to and definition of abundance? Do you look at abundance as what you can buy, or do you look at abundance in nature and the air that you're breathing, the love that you receive and give? And an important thing for you, if you have displacement, is to ask, who am I if everything external is being taken away from me? Like, I don't have my look, I don't have my physical positions, I don't have any money. Who am I? And that can be a very scary question to ask, but nonetheless, it might be one of the questions you can meditate on to strengthen your sense of inner stability. You can really become someone, if you practice this, you can become someone with a very strong foundation, a foundation that merge both the abundance in materialism, abundance in the metaphysical way, in your love, in your psychology, in your emotions, like really build a very rich life. But it is asking of you to not hold on to anything too tightly. It's almost the image of, when your hands are clutched, you can't receive anything. So I would leave you with a question about, what can you rely on for a sense of security if everything external you have disappear tomorrow? What part of you would still be there? And finally, I would add that I also like to look through the houses in their natural axis, meaning that sometimes displacement in the second house can also have some traits identical to if you had displacement in the 8th house, which is one of the more difficult placements. It can be one of the heavier one of the big soul lessons, because it has to do with other people's resources and psyche as well. So perhaps you could have questions about, how can I truly trust other people? Maybe you have themes of betrayal, or just simply being pushed into situations where you need to let go of something or someone very suddenly, which can create a deep soul wound in you and make you doubt whether you can make a comeback. And that is where this Pluto position can be hard to deal with. Nonetheless, it also holds one of the most liberating aspects, which is, again, living in the question of, if everything external was taken from me, what is remained left for me to feel secure? How do I feel secure in myself without anything else to rely on? And that might be a life theme as well. And if that's something that resonates for you, I recommend that you also listen to Pluto in the 8th house, because there might be some mirroring going on there. And if you like this sort of content, please give it a like and a subscribe, and I see you in another video. So Pluto in the 3rd house. Well, first and foremost, the 3rd house is naturally connected to Gemini, and it is the house of the mind. It describes how we think, how we perceive, how we learn, and how we communicate. It's also the way that we gather information, how we process our experiences, and how we start to make sense of the world around us. It is connected to siblings, if you have any, to your neighbors, where you grew up. It is connected to, early environment and early education as well. And this is a house that, when having Pluto here, there were often something in your very early experience of life where there might have been wounding around this area, or some painful, because it has to do with how you develop your own voice, your own mind, your curiosity to exchange ideas with other people as well. And something that I see often in birth chart, having Pluto in the 3rd house, because it could be that they were extremely curious and smart growing up. They were some of these children that never stopped asking why questions, almost to an extent where the adults around them would be really annoyed because they would question everything, question why is this done, why do you do that, why do you speak this way? And there could be a wounding about feeling silenced or not being able to convey how you perceive things into an actual conversation, or simply not being listened to. There could be some wounds in regards to siblings, where perhaps there could have been comparison, or, the feeling that one sibling are better than the other, some hierarchy or some bullying or competition between the siblings as well. I see sometimes with the Pluto in the 3rd house. And it is a placement that is just naturally very curious about the deep matters when it comes to communication. Like, I want to gather information, I want to know why this is, I want to know what this means, I want to understand this. You could have had from an early age extreme, strong, deep mind that loved to read books of all kinds, that loved information of all kinds, but somehow it could be that you got into trouble for getting that information and actually understanding that information. It was like your curiosity just never ended, but at the same time it could cause you a lot of troubles that then became very ingrained patterns of later on perhaps lack of truly being able and capable of expressing yourself and trusting your own voice, trusting your own mind, trusting your own perception of things. It could even be sometimes that you were in a household where the way that you perceived everything was radically different to the rest of the family members, and you felt like the black sheep being just let out of that community very early on. You could have been like a child that became very silent and perhaps feeling that your perception was not as valuable as everyone else. And let's say you grew up in a safe environment and household that really wanted to nurture you, and that it could have been that, when you were out of the house, there were some neighbors or there was some early school environment that enforced this wound, and it wasn't from your immediate family, and perhaps you just never spoke about it because you were having quote-unquote a good childhood, so you didn't want to complain about what was actually going on in the neighborhood or with the people at school. So if we dive even deeper and just take what resonates, because it can manifest in many different ways depending on how your Pluto is aspected in your birth chart, but Pluto tends to really transform the way that we think. So you might have been in many situations in life where you just didn't trust the information you got. Let's say you grew up in a religious household. You would be skeptical naturally of whether this is the full truth. You like to investigate. People with displacement can become incredible investigative journalists, and can become incredible at digging up knowledge that no one else has seemed to have access to, because you have a natural ability to tend what is happening under the surface. You are also not someone who is so satisfied with simple answers, and again that is leading back to you perhaps being in trouble for being the person that always asks why. The shadow of displacement can be that maybe you become very attached to a certain way of thinking once you've found your answer, and then instead of being more continuing being more curious about whether this answer can hold its test through time, you can become rather rigid and perhaps you are being faced with a life circumstance where you're being challenged to completely let go of that over and over again. Another aspect could be that you have overthinking, OCD, that you feel suspicious for no reason, that you constantly feel like there's something hidden beneath the surface, maybe when there isn't. Because Pluto in this third house is not asking you just to continue gathering information and knowledge. It's more like you're here to transform the way that you yourself perceive the world, so that you can walk your talk, so that you can embody all that is going on in your mind, the things that you find to be true for you. You need to it's sort of like the placement of to practice what you preach in order for Pluto to be truly at ease with you, so to speak. And if that's not the case, you will face many periods in life where you have great resistance in regards to how you either think, or you have obsessive thinking, or feeling depressed or anxious or overwhelmed, or just in general staying too much in your mind instead of embodying the knowledge that you have. So a question is, are you willing to change your mind if you find another truth along the way? Because having this flexibility is vital for your well-being when you have Pluto here. And I would say one of the gifts of having Pluto in this placement is you have such a deep perceptive mind. You can become a great philosopher as well, a great journalist, great writer, a great communicator of all sorts, a great researcher, because you can communicate your ideas when you practice through insight. This placement also gives me a bit of the person who is a brilliant writer but can face some level of writer's blockage all too often, because you stay in your mind rather than just allowing yourself to flow the words out in a stream of consciousness, because you might stay a little bit too rational, because that is the language that has kept you safe. But Pluto really asks of you to let go of those restrictions and start flowing more easily whenever there are blockages on the way in regards to communication. Pluto is asking you to transform the parts of you that still holds fear around whether your perception of the world is valid or not. And that is so important, because having Pluto in the third house could sometimes indicate this feeling of being silenced and having your voice blocked very early on. So you might want to try to see how you can reclaim your voice on all levels, how you can speak with more authenticity from your way of perceiving the world, because having Pluto here, your words holds immense power. So it might be vital for you to learn how to feel safe in being heard and expressing yourself from an authentic standpoint. And as I always worked with the axis as well, as I mentioned earlier, you might be also wanting to listen to Pluto in the ninth house and how that shows up, because that might be relevant for you too. And if you like this sort of content, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you in another video. Pluto in the fourth house. Well, in order to really understand this placement, we have to understand the profoundness of the fourth house, because this is really all about the foundation on which you build your life. The fourth house is the house of your privacy, your most private expression. It represents your roots, your maternal part of the family, your family in general, and even your ancestry, the environment that you came into when you grew up, and the environment that your soul chose to be incarnated in. So this is the place where you begin to develop your emotional world. It's also connected deeply to the earliest memories of how you felt safe, your belonging. It's a house that is naturally connected to Cancer. So think about all the traits of the Cancer as the zodiac sign. That is, again, the maternal nourishment, connection with the moon, feeling of safety, of nourishment, of especially your emotions, your emotional well-being, your family that you grew up in, the roots in general. So on top of that, I would say it's also about your inner home, like the environment within yourself and how you nourish yourself later on. And so when we have a Pluto placement here, there can be a great sense of your emotions at times being extremely overwhelming, of having experiences where the foundation of your life, maybe even your literal home environment, were just changing from one day to another. It's not unusual that I see people with displacement having some very early childhood trauma in regards to their immediate caretakers, either, leaving from one day to another, divorce taking place, a household that were unsafe or just changed a lot and wasn't really stable. It can also be especially generational patterns of silence, of not speaking about emotions, of having an environment that is emotionally unsafe, where you didn't feel that you were nourished or protected or listened to. It could be even indicating that you might have had a generation of mothers that were silenced or were living in scarcity, survival, having to rebuild themselves. It's also not unusual that I see people with displacement who grew up in single mother households and felt that their mother were too stressed out to really be there for them on an emotional level. So it could really be that you have reoccurring life lessons in regards to your emotional safety, your home environment, and your belonging. And what is important for you is to learn how to create that stability, emotional stability coming from yourself, from within, so that you know that you are capable and able to take care of yourself no matter what happens in your external environments. It could even be that, for some people with displacement, that there was such an emotional unstable environment around you. So you find yourself as a grown-up feeling almost incapable of what do I need, what do I want, what are my emotions, because you were programmed through perhaps the hardship that you saw in your environment growing up. And that could again create these tests in life for learning how to integrate and become that parent for yourself that you might not have had, or becoming that stability for yourself that you might not have had. One of the power moves of having Pluto in the 4th house is that you have an extraordinary awareness of what is just beneath the surface. Especially when it comes to beneath the surface of a family dynamics, all areas that has to do with emotional intelligence or being sensitive to other people's needs will be very easily accessible for you. And although that can come with a certain level of pain, because sometimes you need to learn how to trust what you feel over what it looks like on the surface. But once you can find that trust, that confidence, you can become someone who can highly transform unhealthy patterns, both if you wish to be someone who is doing that in work, but also for breaking generational trauma and issues and not repeating that. You are in many ways the epiphany of it ends with me. You might have seen things in your family or known of history of your family, of unhealthy patterns, And you are the one that completely breaks that by working with your own emotional landscape and making sure not to pass on those traumas to the next generation. You can become really exceptional at that, but at times it can also feel very frustrating to you because you feel you might be constantly challenged with people, circumstances, and situations where that is just not the case, and you need to dive even deeper into healing the parts of yourself that still feel unsafe. You're also most likely someone who can really be good at recognizing patterns. I would say one of the shadow sides of this placement that you could be aware of is that sometimes you could withdraw emotionally to protect yourself. Think again of, the Cancerian traits of Cancer, the zodiac sign that has this shell around you. And if you build too many walls around your heart, you will not be able to receive others. So that might also be something to work on. Or you feel responsible for carry other people's burdens. You could be the person that walks into a room and you are feeling just fine, and suddenly you have headache or your shoulders is hurting, because before you become aware of your true superpowers, which lies in this placement of seeing what's truly hidden beneath the surface on an emotional level, you might subconsciously take on other people's burdens. Your body might show where other people is holding tension, and so you really do have the capability of becoming a true healer in whatever form that might appeal to you. And learn to become really conscious about what patterns belongs to you and what you leave with other people, so that you don't take these burdens and carry them as if they are your own. I would also say that your transformation and the gifts of Pluto comes when you stop confusing, survival and safety. Meaning that if you grew up in anything that wasn't, the perfect household, you might have a certain familiarity with emotional dysfunction, but at the same time, you could have grown into believing this is my safety zone, so you repeat those patterns, and the transformation can only take place once you realize that these are not creating the type of life that you came here to live. So profound emotional wisdom with displacement and a capability to really transform, especially the maternal line patterns, generational patterns, to bring truths to the surface, into the light, so that you can change the emotional legacy for everyone that comes into contact with you and after you. So really know that you are not here to repeat the past. You're really here to see what that looked like so that you can make it healthy. And also, because I do love to work with the houses in the axis, you might want to look to the description of having Pluto in the 10th house as well, because sometimes that can give some extra layers or some mirroring on what Pluto in this house is, how it's expressing itself for you. And also remember the personal aspects, like the planets and placements that your Pluto is communicating with in your birth chart, is adding another crucial layer to this story. So this is what I have for you with the Pluto in the 4th house. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope to meet you in another video.